I was fortunate that I was selected to go off to another platform as executive officer because the other crew, XO, was going to take the ship through overhaul. So I was chosen to be the commissioning executive officer on USS Ohio.
Oh, wow.
And Ohio was the first of our Trident class of submarines. We had built 41 ballistic missile submarines at that point, Polaris, Poseidon ships. But now we were building the first ship of our new Trident class of submarines at Electric Boat. And that ship had been in construction through much of the 70s, and this was now the early part of the 80s. And so I reported aboard in February of 1981, and in April of 1981 we took the Ohio to sea for its first sea trials before it was commissioned on November 11th of 1981. So it was a very significant transition for the submarine force because we had just built a ship that was designed to be operated out of our strategic base in Bangor, Washington, and ultimately the other Trident submarines would be operated out of the strategic base in Kings Bay, Georgia. So the strategic capability of the Tridents were enormous. Now we had gone from 16 ballistic missile tubes to 24 tubes, and the Trident missile that we were going to carry in that particular platform was going to be 84 inches in diameter. So it was an incredibly capable missile. It was an incredibly accurate missile, and it was a very sophisticated upgrade to our operating capability for those particular platforms. So 18 of those would ultimately be built, but the first one was Ohio, and it was, so that's the class was essentially named the Ohio class of Trident submarines. So during the period of time between commissioning in November of '81 and when we took the ship around to Bangor, Washington and established it as the first ship in the new strategic base in Bangor, we were doing sea trials and acoustic trials and testing of the platform in the Atlantic and then in the Pacific. And ultimately, when we took the ship up the Hood Canal and into the Olympic Peninsula, this was the first ship that had ever been based in that particular part of the world. And of course, we were met with a significant amount of protesters. It was a very interesting arrival because people had known that the nuclear warheads that went on top of the ballistic missiles had been shipped from the places where they were built in Abilene, Texas, and other places on rail cars that had gone into the state of Washington. And so the protesters would lie down on the rail tracks and that sort of thing. So there was a strong anticipation that many of these protesters at that particular time, I think it was probably the fall of 1982, would in fact greet us and potentially even put their lives at risk to demonstrate their protest of the arrival of this particular ship. So as we went through the Straits of Juan de Fuca and started to go up the Hood Canal, we were accompanied by a Coast Guard escort.
Okay.
And it was a couple of cutters, a helicopter. We had the fire hoses charged to topside with our line handlers. They were all equipped with flak jackets, and the people on the bridge were all equipped with flak jackets and small arms in case somebody tried to. There was that level of concern about the arrival of the ship in Bangor, Washington. They had been building this base for about 7 or 8 years, and so they finally had a ship that they could maintain, and it was quite a celebration when it did arrive. Fortunately, we did have some protesters that tried to take their Zodiacs up aboard the ship, and threw red paint on the hull of the ship and that sort of thing. But fortunately, nobody was hurt, and we were able to safely bring the ship into port in Bangor, Washington, and establish its presence there, and then start the cycle, which was similar to what we had done in these overseas bases, but now instead of having to fly away for a deployment, we were able to do the turnover and the crew exchange right there in our home port. So I made 2 deployments with the Gold Crew of Ohio on through 1982 and into 1983, and departed in the the spring of 1984 to go to prospective commanding officer school.